makes me wonder where in the hell we all went wrong. And those that are left, the pain and the shame and a question to the deep blue sky. Brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, can you hear the tears they cry? Talia, I would give my yesterday. Talia, must be something left to say.
Talia is a beautifully sad song. Its message needs to echo out across society's most insensitive idealisms. The words are provocative and their thought challenging, and they are emotionally haunting and frightening. The passage saying, "Did you feel the breeze today?" can only be interpreted by those who know the emotional reflection of the courage that one must entrust in the belief that the will to endure life is less than the will of the courage to live it. We must honour the decision that many of our young people make to free the pain and the suffering, and is reflected in the truth of far too many, far too young, gone too soon. When you think life is taken from you all, it can and will soon let you know that it can take more. There are those in a teardrop that understand the reality of the emotional fret of the very need of "I'm going to have to put you down for a while." The words "where in the hell did we all go wrong" is a question to the reflection of turning away from those most in need. It is a human attribute to learn from the pain and suffering of our old people, to grow stronger given pain meaning, so no Noongar life has ever been lived in vain, and left those that are behind with more resilience and strength for affording the respect of the purpose of suffering and death. Let us not turn away any longer.
Talia, did you feel the breeze today?
Today we would like to give a tribute to those harmless, innocent and peaceful souls who have been dragged into dark, damp prisons. For those who have had their children stolen away. For those who are facing the living hell and despair of severe addiction. For those lost in the torment of mental illness and scarred with the pain of self-inflicted injury. For those confused by identity crisis. For those of us in the freeze suffering the insanity of ice. And especially to those of our very young and frail who at this very moment are having their innocence shattered at the hands of monsters. Forgive me today if I slip or I stutter, or even if I might fall. I very seldom speak in public. I'm not an academic or scholar, and certainly not a celebrity. I barely completed high school, never pursued a career, and barely listened to advice or abided by any rules. I never broke any laws though, as I would never have allowed him to drag me like an animal, incarcerated into his cage, being forced to respond to his every demand and order. I don't tolerate the vagueness of intoxication, nor the frivolous minds and superficial ideals of the shallow interpretation of racial superiority. I've experienced dark sarcasm and racism from authorities since my early school years to my adulthood. From teachers who caned me until welts erupted over my legs as they blood blistered my hands, to having experienced severe assaults from police officers without any justifiable cause. My rebellious nature obviously interfered with their power of control. I despise religious hypocrisy and propaganda. I don't care for those who have traded the preciousness of their humanity and their emotional values for tinsel and plastic, nor those who have sold their spirit for a quick, blood-stained, dirty dollar. I don't believe in nationalism. It's offensive, and it gives a false sense of identity of those who have stolen lands of which they now believe that they so rightfully inherit. Capitalism is the driving force that has given a false sense of credence to the values of democracy that maintains the third world impoverishment of death and misery. The only thing I see worth fighting for in life is to preserve and maintain our cultural identity with dignity and integrity, and save our precious land from any further environmental holocaust resulting from industries that destroy the beauty of our religious belief sites. I don't believe in a word of the Australian anthem, and I've never stood in respect of its deceitful verses. I'm pleased to be here today with you all to share my Juma, or in our language of the Noongar people, to Wongi My Bardip. I would like to give recognition and respect to a man who is here this morning, Mr. John Powell. He is a Noongar man who is an inspiration to many, and certainly has been a kudda, a brother, to me in my most darkest hour. I respect your journey in life, John, and all you have had to endure. I would also like to recognise Mr. Victor Ronan, a Noongar elder and the chairperson of Dumbartung. Corinda, my beautiful daughter, who taught me that beauty should never be imprisoned. I give my respects to the elders and the warriors who were the Buddhias of their Budja, the territories, at the time of colonisation. The great elder, the elder of the Banksia ceremonies, Walo. To Midjiguru, Yagan and Yalagonga, leaders of the central wetlands, the great Yokine, the breeding grounds of the dingo, now known as Dog Swamp, where the great chewit trees once grew, now known as Chewit Hill. To Weep and Munda, the leaders of the Hills peoples. To Banyalo, the leader of the peoples of the great southern swamps. To Bulbuck, the ceremonial keeper of the religious tracts of the last of the great Noongar women resistance leaders. With blood in her eyes, she smashed the fence lines of the forced occupation of Noongar land. Here today, we are on Warra ground, strong and sacred. This was the very site that 20 years ago, Noongar people gathered, resisting and protesting against the redevelopment of the Swan Brewery to protect and save the sacred site of the Woggle Dreaming and the freshwater springs. We are on the sacred site in Noongar language called Kargadup, commonly known as Kings Park. It was on the rock slopes of these sacred cliffs that the blood loss of the great warriors of the Whadjuk tribe flowed down the rock faces, where the English soldiers with bayonets and rifles in hand slid in the blood as they scaled to the top of the escarpment where the Union Jack was plunged into the heart of our sacred ground. It is on this very same ground that the War Memorial to all fallen Australian soldiers is built, without any recognition and memory of any Noongar warrior who was killed in the forced occupations of these lands. Fresh water was the most trusted creation and gift of the Woggle. Holes where water surface was sacred to Aboriginal people. Our freshwater holes were stricken and laced with poisons such as strychnine, which drove the thirst of death to the very tongue of our 14 great nations and every child within. This is for my young kudda. He's a young Noongar boy who's a severe petrol sniffer, who dances in the bitter cold winds as they blow from the Canning River. This only he knows is not what he would choose to do. I hope that he is afforded the caring arms of a stranger who will ultimately carry him home, for soon he'll be dead. He knows that no breastplate hangs around my neck. We give great homage to our warriors who are chained, shackled and incarcerated forever into the forbidden lands. There are many introduced prophets and saviours on crosses that blemish our lands, forged of belief systems from foreign countries, alien to our creation stories, that have linked us to the belonging of this land and laws since the beginning of time. Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, the Baha'i faith, Shintoism, Buddhism and all other world religions have contaminated the true indigenous spirituality of this land that has governed the ceremonies of our 14 great nations. Our culture is alive and our culture is strong. Our Marban is powerful. In the old days, our medicine men, the boil men, would climb to sacred mountain peaks and generate power from the rolling thunder and the massive lightning strikes. May the echoes be heard again across the campfires of our leaders and far into the despair and the hearts of our broken spirits. The knowledge of how to nurture life with life, the great prongrups, the oldest granite formation on the earth, 1,000 million years old. Stories of relations giving evidence to holes where the spirits dwell. This was the very first place on earth where flora bore colour, the red of the kangaroo paw. White people measure the wealth of this land in terms of its mineral wealth, such as gold, silver, copper, nickel, iron ore, coal, gas, gemstones such as diamonds and opals, sapphires, and the yet-to-come full-scale mining of U308 pure yellow cake uranium. Our people measured the spiritual importance of this land in terms of the ochre, the ancient paint that differentiated man from all other life forms. White, representing women's law, gave evidence to the body fluids of life, the wetlands, the ancient law grounds of Noongar women's religious sites. From the beginning of time in these proud lands, our people were strong. Our warriors stood knowing and believing that they merged from the red ochre, the Wilgi, the bloodline links with our great moieties, the Wardong, the crow, and the Manich, the white cockatoo. The giving of the knowledge of skin groups, and the great majestic Karak, the red-tailed black cockatoo, the fire-bringer, and Guyar, the rainmaker, transcending from the first forms of life, from the sacred waters that gave the blood flow to the very birth of humanity. Our people were massacred standing against the forced occupation of our land and our religious beliefs. Assimilation was a forced policy, rupturing the bloodlines of the Noongar clans, forcing the intrusion of legalised rape that has been tracked back to the very heart of blue blood regal English families and the so-called gentlemen within. The remaining difficulty of eradication was simply extinguished by unleashing the convicts like the Black Plagues of Europe upon the nations of our peoples. The purest bloodlines had been destroyed in one generation forever. There were, as we are now, forged into a continued war against genocide that threatens the very right of our existence. Once there existed a massive forest that stretched from Albany in the south to Geraldton in the north. The trees that comprised this ancient forest was the great Mary, Carry, Jarrahs, the Dryandra, the Chewits, the great eucalypts and the gum trees with deep understories, were and are unique to the great southern region. In the Perth Basin grew a unique and rare sandalwood that was found nowhere else on the planet. This is now extinct. These forests were destroyed by the agricultural industry, mining, wheat farming, contemporary industries such as natural resource companies like Mount Romance, ecotourism programs and wineries. Our country, as wild as its spirit is, dies before our eyes. These great forests have fallen from self-poisoners and conquerors. Australians don't care for much at all, land the least. Whilst people sit back and watch the environment destroyed, deserts of salt rise, the rivers polluted, and the skies change forever. Noongar people know that with every bush, tree, rock, waterway and wetland destroyed, a very real part of our spiritual and physical existence dies with it. The great southern rivers and estuaries are polluted with man-made poisons, leaking lead and other chemical residuals and fertilisers into the life of where once flourished what was truly a Garden of Eden, this our land of flowers. The industrial wealth of global conglomerates such as BHP, Billiton, Rio Tinto, Argyle, Woodside and others destroy sacred sites and areas of significance, profiting from the sales of natural resources, creating delusions of the theft of these Aboriginal-owned constituents, giving false credence to their so-called social development policies for Aboriginal communities, whilst our young people are challenged with epidemics such as youth suicide, severe drug addiction, depression, domestic violence, racism and rejection, resulting in an ever-increasing statistic of continued incarceration into prisons across Western Australia. Hellholes of human misery with the stench of death was the fateful reality of genocide, where the natural resources of places that gave birth to the nation's wealth, such as the goldfields of the Western Desert Block, was a world shame that looked away from the plight and the desperation of the great Wongi peoples as they died before the eyes of affluent white Australia. This disgraceful rape and desecration of the sacred waters of the Millstream's Injabunji tribes of Roban, in the so-called animal cage of the Victoria Hotel, where the blood-stained future of a once proud people screamed into the great unknown as their sacred waters poured life energy into Karratha, giving existence to a multi-million-dollar mining town with a vision into the future of murder, the death of a young 16-year-old boy named John Pat at the hands of police officers 20 years ago became the symbolic death of the announcement of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. The creation of the Ord River scheme that watered the stock industries and the Argyle diamond mines created the fringe dwellers of Kununurra and the Eastern Kimberley, where shameful realities of oppression and dispossession is an indictment on Australia's international human rights agendas and policies, as these great peoples became simply known as the ditch warriors. I remember at Nookambah when Stephen Hawke, the son of Bob Hawke, said to the Aboriginal people, "My father has sent you a message from the ACTU. The wildcat drills that are targeted to drill on the Carter Dreamin' track, the Goanna site will rust in the fields. The unions will not allow the operation of the equipment." 2 weeks later, the wildcat drills smashed their way through the sacred earth, crushing the very spirit of the people of Nookambah forever. The unions had no intention of going against the government, and the unions remained greedy. I give a tribute of recognition to the children of the stolen generations, whose lives suffered the pain of torture, sexual rape, neglect and abuse. For those who heard the echoes of the despair as it whispered, "It's for your own good," they knew that was a lie. It is to enable you to assimilate. They knew that was a lie. Your mothers and fathers don't love you. They knew that was a lie. Your culture and religion is pagan. They knew that was a lie. These were the young children whose lives had been shattered by the fear of horror and torment, with bodies full of scars that endured daily rituals of punishment, enforcing religious and educational assimilation within institutions no better than death camps. Suffering stone-bruised feet and ice-flesh barefoot wounds from the freezing cold numbness, often taking the warmth from the freshly dropped cow dung to place their feet for warmth. They were made to darn the priest's socks and polish the nun's boots. These were the children who were made to kneel for hours in harsh, sharp gravel as punishment, whilst the priests and nuns recited prayer overhead, punishing the renegade children who were runaways by throwing them into dark, rat-infested underground dungeons, shaving and hacking off their hair till blood trickled down their cheeks like tears as deterrents to others. These were the young children whose minds conditioned their bodies to accept the stench of the putrid smell of constant sheephead broth, weevil-infested porridge, whilst the priests and the nuns ate banquets of product that the young children were made to labour the harvest from the institution's orchards and dairies. These were the children behind the massive walls of the new Norcia mission, without question the most ruthless and barbaric mission of all, unquestionably Australia's equivalent to Auschwitz. Roland's wandering sister Kate's no anger up in Magumba. These were the last of the generations that needed to be dispossessed from the land and culture that enabled the white man to eventually take full possession and force his occupation over the wealth of the great southern lands. These children, when released from the missions, were forced to become slave labour for affluent middle-class homes in the city's suburbs. The young women worked as domestics, shining and polishing the gold and the silver of the rich mansions, whilst the young men laboured only for flour, sugar and tea. It was during these times that the churches, were being granted vast tracts of prime real estate across Western Australia, particularly across the metropolitan area on riverfront locations such as Salters Point, Rossmoyne, Waterford, Fremantle and the city area. Today, this land is being privately sold for commercial development, generating thousands of millions of dollars into the church's bankrolls, counting its loot as the mafia arms of religion do. These children eventually became the fringe dwellers of the old East Perth area, where the great campfires of the inner city camps burnt in places that became known as the Bull Paddock, Miller's Cave and the Starlight Hotel. I give my respects to the old people and the young who suffered and died in these appalling conditions not 20 years ago. Alcohol abuse was rife on the fringes, drowning away the sorrows and the emotional torment of pain. Inner city hotels such as the Old Beaufort Hotel, the Kiora Wine Saloon, the Great Western and others by legislative law were able to sell strong fortified spirit at 6 o'clock in the morning. These hotels were referred to as the early openers, with licences to kill, as most of the fringe dwellers died from alcohol-related causes before they turned 30 years of age. Aboriginal mental health in our community is a disgrace. For how much longer can bureaucrats and academics theorise trauma associated with self-injury without ever leaving the comfort of their university or their political offices? These authorities become armchair human rights advocates, articulating and forging our human rights agendas into structures that are alien to our spiritual and our cultural belief systems. Drug-induced depression and psychotic mania reflects the ever-increasing statistics that determine Aboriginal suicide in our young people's lives to be at an epidemic status. The never-ending grieving process of the Aboriginal community is the ingrained trauma that merges from generation to generation, stemming from the ongoing practices of previous genocide implementations. How many more research initiatives and programs that survey the health of Aboriginal people, coordinated by institutions such as the Telethon Institute for Child Health, the Health Department, Alcohol and Drug Authorities and others, do we need before the deaths and the sickness stop? Prior to colonisation, there was no influenza, diabetes, heart disease or cancers. The tall ships introduced into our land smallpox, venereal disease, psychological and emotional sickness, drunkenness, domestic violence and drug addiction, child sexual abuse and prostitution. These entities did not exist prior to colonisation. The misconceived hype of police statistics and reports that create fear, prioritising the Aboriginal youth crime that climbs through your lounge room and bedroom windows to strike 3 and you're in for 12 months of crimes of opportunity. These acts of crimes are committed by the networking of more organised criminals in the upper part of town in the Northbridge business area, awaiting the arrival of stolen goods for small amounts of drugs traded. Aboriginal youth crime is nothing more than a transitional domino effect of an exploitive, manipulative network system that is generated from a higher level of demand, exploiting addiction and poverty. This level of crime is often referred to by the media as the business identities of Perth. Nobody move and nobody gets hurt. It is with an uncanny certainty that today many Noongar fathers, mothers, grandfathers and grandmothers say, "It's good my son or daughter has been sent to prison. They'll be safe and they'll be kept alive." The total population of Aboriginal people in Western Australia comprises 2.4% of the total population, while statistically representing 60% of the prison statistics and in excess of 70% of juvenile incarceration. What sort of world has been created when parents are made to feel that their children are safer incarcerated? That trying to survive in a world of racial challenges and brutality, plagued by the real throw of the dice, whether you will survive in a drug-fuelled night in the so-called free world, the lucky country, Well, true blue, your flag is a butcher's apron, blood-stained with the death of our people, and your so-called fair go for all is a hypocritical lie. The so-called taste of honey and milk is bitter and stained with the death of our people. The harsh reality of colonisation and conquering land is that some must die that allows others to live. The Western Australian media ruthlessly pollutes the minds of people, censored, cunning manipulation that creates distorted truths by means of biased influences, of the wealth of the conservative interests, of the power of the oppression, of the human rights of the true traditional owners of this country, the Aboriginal people. Generalised racism creates the fact that most white people possess strong views and opinions that gives reference to the table talk, that they know more about Aboriginal people than Aboriginal people know about themselves. The truth and reality is that many have never met an Aboriginal person in their life. The Western Australian media is brutal. I remember when the loving parents of a young 14-year-old boy had the horrifying experience that all parents would dread when they were called to a city morgue to witness the body of their beloved son, who was killed in a high-speed car chase. That very same morning, the disgusting and inhumane statement was made by the talkback show host of 6PR, Howard Sattler, "Good riddance to bad rubbish," as he referred to the death of this young boy. Some years later, when an 11-year-old girl in the Metropolitan School was defending herself in a corner, 3 large police officers emptied an entire can of pepper spray over her neck and face. In describing this incident, Sattler stated, "She got what she deserved." The unchallenged racial mockery that was the idiocy of the Dutch-born Louis Beers, the black-painted fool known as King Billy Coke Bottle, was frequently heard on the Perth airwaves. He should have been charged under the Racial Vilification Act. Aboriginal affairs is an industry. Governments maintain corruption in our community to enforce their control and policy development over every aspect of our life. Portfolios of government and in every position are filled predominantly and occupied by non-Aboriginal people. Aboriginal affairs is a scandal, where the powers of government have deliberately ensured that Aboriginal people will never gain self-determination because less than 10% of the so-called black dollar reaches the needs of the community before it's exploited and capitalised on by non-Aboriginal interests, creating the deceit that Aboriginal people reap financial rewards that aren't available to the average Australian. This is another politically inspired lie. Our solace and our salvation as Aboriginal people will not be defined by academic doctrines or degrees, nor bestowing on our weak the illusionary false status of power positions of authority such as associated professorships, doctors' titles or statesmen's profiles. Nor will our strengths be unified by introduced religions, nor will it be solicited from the halls of Geneva. Nor will it be found in the greed of politics, where the eruption of the very core of democracy is eroded by corruption, now more evident than ever. Another dollar found up the hole of a fallen politician or a trade unionist. The bigger the politician, the bigger the lie. Our old people's way of life has all but been destroyed. The language, the ceremonial knowledge and wisdom that was passed through thousands of generations lies in its diluted forms within the confines of the archives of anthropological interests. Like the cultural objects of our once great warriors, they have now become trophies of the white man's ruthless obsession to conquer and colonise. The bones and the skeletal body parts of our people were dispersed throughout the world's laboratories for scientific research. Also as macabre souvenirs, many skulls of our proud warriors were carved to become ashtrays within the confines of the wealthy homes of the aristocrats of Britain and Europe. Our sacred and our significant sites of great ceremonial importance, including our traditional burial sites, have become tourist meccas and playgrounds for affluent middle-class white Australians, destroying forever their spiritual and cultural entity, where now their value is only determined and measured in the amount of dollars they generate from tourism. Our traditional bush medicine is now capitalised on by commercial companies such as pharmaceuticals, naturopaths, botanists, herbalists and self-proclaimed healers who explore their components for vaccines and for world sickness, whilst multinational companies promote them as new age lotions and potions. Our sacred and significant cultural objects such as the didgeridoo, the clapsticks and the bull roarers are all marketed and sold as unique souvenirs, becoming mantelpiece ornaments and objects of foreign New Age practice. What was once sacred objects for ceremonial use now echo out from world orchestras, rock bands and street corner buskers. Our people's cultural and spiritual pride has been reduced to suffering the humiliation of generating economics from our traditional heritage. Capitalising on colonisation, selling our culture, trading our spirituality, whilst you wine, dine and play golf and football on our once great hunting grounds. Our culture is promoted by government as an industry, classified as art. Our traditional dance has become theatrics for middle-class white audiences. Our welcome to ceremonial gatherings and smoking ceremonies have become feel-good political ideologies and concepts, giving credence to the falsity of reconciliation, whilst our people are stripped of their cultural integrity and their dignity. The Aboriginal struggle and cause for this generation is to rebuild the cultural and the spiritual strengths of our people's identity, to generate pride and knowledge of who we are as a people and where we belong in the vast diversity of all living things, to re-establish the authority of our elders so their knowledge and experience can become like fire sticks in the darkness of pain and suffering, reigniting the ashes of our once great campfires, lighting the way for the unification of our people. As the great Mal, the eye of the Yolga, the eagle, casts an endless shadow of movement over the sacred Budja, the land, void of any emotional reason, pierced by the bloodshed of our great warriors, the wisdom of our elders and the strengths of our future generations. The recently published category number 8155 of the Australian Bureau of Statistics states that the combined mining industries in Western Australia generate a massive $201 million a day, equaling $8.5 million per hour, reflecting $140,000 every time the clock strikes 1 minute. The recently completed redress scheme in Western Australia that was initiated to compensate individuals who were abused and neglected whilst in state institutions as wards received inadequate ex gratia payments for what they had suffered at the hands of perpetrators. The total budget for redress was $114 million. An estimated 25% of this was administration expenditure. Redress received less than a half a day's generated natural resource profit to address this human right issue, and this is certainly an indictment on the human rights agendas of Western Australia. There is no doubt when the last tree, as a depressed poet recites, is ripped from the earth, when water is no more, and the earth empowers stronger energies to heal the massive ruptures of its life energies that are often referred to as natural disasters. You will glimpse back to look for us, and we will be gone. As the last human being enters the gravesite for all humanity, they will realise that the last offering to a burnt, blistered earth is a great hole that will be a testament of your greed, lust and power for money. May our campfires burn forever.